Everybody's drive home brain dump time. A continuation from the video I just posted. Shot on the same day, which is why I'm wearing the same shirt. I'm trying to raise some money for CampQuest, Texas, as are David Smalley from Dogma Debate and Arn Ra, who everybody already knows from his YouTube videos covering creationism and evolution. Arn and I did this competition last year, and we've added David Smalley to the mix. Thanks to Zach Moore for setting all this up. There's a link down below where if you're able to donate, please do. And if you're not, don't worry about it. I monetize these videos, and watching them, you're already helping out just by getting this far. So, a couple weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, was the 50th anniversary American Atheist National Convention here in Austin, Texas. I had a great time. I get to meet lots of people, some who were just really appreciative about what we had done on the show and talking about how it affected their lives or how they had encouraged others to watch, and others had benefited from it as well. I finally got to meet A.C. Grayling, which was an absolute pleasure, one of the nicest people on the planet. And unfortunately, I didn't get to meet Bob Price. He was unable to actually attend, although I'm told that they did allowed him to Skype in to do his talk. But I was shooting documentary footage, or being interviewed for one or two documentaries that people were doing in association with the convention. But in this video, I want to talk about something interesting that happened on Wednesday night, and it was a panel discussion, not a debate, with three atheist representatives on one side, and that being David Silverman, President of American Atheists, Kathy Johnson, the Vice President, and A.C. Grayling. And on the other side were three pastors from the Austin area. And there's a lot to talk about with this. I'm going to try to keep it pretty short. Of course, there's nobody who, as far as I know, I'm in complete agreement with. And so not every answer from every side of the panel was something that I thought was awesome, but taken in total, the conversation I thought was pretty productive and generally well done. The interesting parts for me started after this conversation took place because of some individuals that I had the chance to talk to. Now, several people came up to, just say hello and, hey, we're looking forward to the convention. Some of them expressed their concern with the fact that the pastors were, in their view, fundamentalists and all of the same stripe. And that really kind of caught me off guard, because none of these guys were fundamentalists in particular, and the three of them were not the same. Right down to one of the pastors brought David a 6-pack of Shiner Bock to share with him, when I know at least one of the others doesn't drink and doesn't think that Christians should be drinking. So, I mean, there are a number of differences there. And by and large, these guys, at least what they represent in public, is a more moderate and in some answers liberal take on Christianity. I think growing up in a Southern Baptist fundamentalist, pretty literalist tradition, I have a pretty good perspective on the different types of Christianity. And other people who were raised more liberal, or perhaps Catholic, or Jewish, just kind of paint a broad brush over Christianity as, oh, look, those guys were fundamentalists, when they really weren't. But all three of the pastors came up to me afterwards and, talked about how they all knew who I was, what the show was, and they had all been looking forward to talking to me and working with me on something, but had never had the opportunity. Which catches me a little off guard when I hear pastors saying things like that. But one of them in particular was extremely enthusiastic about how much he loved the show and what we were doing, and I went ahead and gave him my contact information. Actually, I gave my contact information to all three of those pastors, but he's the only one that contacted me afterwards, and he contacted me immediately afterwards, and more than once. And so last Sunday, Beth and I went and visited his church, and last Monday we went out to dinner with him. And I think that on some level, we've become friends of a sort. I mean, I don't know that we're going to be hanging out all the time. And we talked a little bit about, my story and Beth's story so that he can get some perspective and what our thoughts were. And I talked a little bit about his theology. Next time, he's going to tell us more about his story and his theology. But we went out to a Mexican restaurant. We shared a drink. We had a conversation. And while Will and I, the pastor, had fun kind of poking at each other for grammatical errors or linguistic errors, and I picked apart bits of his sermon that I thought were just demonstrably false, that had nothing to do with Christian theology. This was funny. It was kind of outside the scope. And he picked apart some things that I said, and we had a good time. We still obviously disagree, and disagree strongly on some things that we barely got to touch. And I look forward to more conversations with him and working with him in the future. And he's a great guy, and not a fundamentalist. I'm pretty sure that most of the fundamentalists that I was raised around wouldn't even think he was a Christian. And yet, one of the funny things that he said was that he's convinced that Beth and I are Christians. His view of Christianity is this salvation by grace from God, and that it can't be taken away. And so he's convinced that we were sincere Christians, saved by grace once upon a time, and so this still applies. We haven't had a chance to really talk about it in great detail, and he was careful to point out that he wasn't trying to insult us by saying it. I don't find it insulting that he happens to think this. I just find it really bizarre if in fact it's true. If he's correct and there's a God and God picks people that he's going to save, and I used to be saved, or I got saved, and so I'm always going to be saved. What a preposterous and strange set of circumstances that is, that I'm a Christian in this individual's eyes, saved in God's eyes, and yet I neither believe that this God exists, nor would I worship that God or revere that God if I were to discover that it did exist. I'm not just an atheist. It's not just that I don't believe that Christianity or theism or theistic claims are true. I'm also an anti-religionist, an anti-theist, and an anti-Christian in particular for most Christian theologies. I mean, Christianity is a widely varying set of beliefs, as we can tell from this discussion I'm having with Will. But the idea of original sin, substitutional atonement, blood sacrifice, the foundational core of the theology is something that I not only don't believe, but I find it morally repugnant and would reject it if I were to, discover that was actually the process. But also, he believes in a God who's willing to save somebody, whatever that actually means. I'm not necessarily completely sure what under Will's theology I'm being saved to or from. But he's willing to do this for somebody who not only doesn't believe, but if he existed, would utterly reject him. And I'm pretty sure that in Will's eyes and the eyes of others, that this is an example of just how awesome this God is, that he would save somebody who despises this God's character. And I just find it ridiculous that this proposition even makes sense to people. And many times, Will would point out that, well, I'm judging God by man's standards. And we'll talk about this more in the future, I'm sure, because I'm not judging God by man's standards. I'm judging God by the only standards that I have available, and that's reason, evidence, empathy, humanity. And if the proposition is absurd, based on those standards, then telling me that I'm judging by the wrong standards and that I need to be judging by God's standards really doesn't solve anything. Because if I don't know what God's standards are, I can't do it, which is part of the claim that I can't understand God's standards, which means that it's impossible for me to really judge according to those. But even if I did understand God's standards, it doesn't mean I agree with them. And he believes in a God who created all of us and stuck us down here with a brain that is incapable of comprehending God, incapable of understanding God's standards, and yet expects us to judge God based on standards that we don't comprehend, when everything else in the universe we judge based on our own understanding. And this is further contradicted by the fact that our inability to use any other standards other than our own, means that Will has used his own standards to determine that judging by standards he doesn't understand is reasonable. It goes back to the thing that I said ages ago, which is, okay, you have God and Satan, and they're both powerful beings beyond your comprehension, both in what they can do and what their goals and positions are. How on earth did you determine that God is the good one and Satan is the bad one? I mean, when I look at what is attributed to God and Satan, I see that I generally judge them both as being immoral. But I can find redeeming qualities or good qualities in either one of them. This doesn't concern me because I don't think either of them are real, and I don't see any need to revere or worship either of them, or anything for that matter. But it's a very confusing situation to simultaneously acknowledge that you're in the position that you have to exercise your own mental faculties to determine that God is good, and yet you are actually incapable of doing this because the standards by which you judge him are flawed. It's like saying that you have a flawed computer receiving flawed information and it needs to come up with the right answer. Doesn't that mean that if you got the right answer, it's just happenstance? Don't we, as a matter of course in our daily lives, strive as skeptics and rationalists, critical thinkers, to have good, solid, evidence-based reasons that we understand for the things that we believe? I mean, isn't that the goal? And yet, curiously, when it comes to God, we can chuck all that out the window. I don't know. So, hopefully Will and I will be having more conversations in the future. I'll talk about them, without revealing anything private or privileged, of course. But I still enjoyed it because I like engaging with people who think, even when they think differently from the way that I think, and even when they don't really exercise critical thinking skills and reason in the same way that I do. Because he made appeals to faith and then tried to say that his faith was like reason-based, which clearly we're using two different definitions for the word faith. So maybe Will and I will sort that and about 10 or 12 other things out the next time we talk. In any case, if you're able to, click the link. Donate to CampQuest Texas. Help some kids have fun at summer camp so that in the future they can exercise those critical thinking skills to respond to pastors who want to include them in their broad definition of Christianity. Bye-bye.